way we do it in parliamentary countries. There is a crisis, we hold new elections. So they invented these things. So it's actually much more beautiful than. And what is interesting also after the policy interruptions, which not necessarily only occur here, but what has occurred after every of these interruptions is that in the early cases, from the ISI model towards neoliberalism, you get an interrupted president and you get immediate and vast policy changes. It did not occur only in Argentina and Bolivia, as you know, but it did occur there. And there are some evidence that points to the fact that, you know, the previous crisis helped actually the incoming government of, you know, declaring the necessity of these vast reforms. So you go from Alfonsín to Menem, Siles Suazo to Paz and Sol in Argentina. So the demands for policy change are often heard as well by the incoming government. I'm not saying that in Bolivia and Argentina what they were crying for was neoliberalism, but that's at least what came. In the later cases, and in a paper I've quoted Jon Elster on this. He said something about when you have a situation, a regime that's not in equilibrium or in balance, there are two errors a government can do. That's either to do too little or to do too much. So in italics I've put the president that tried to do something but did too little, and in bold I've put the president that maybe have done too much in terms of change. I don't know. But you go from Carlos Andrés Pérez via Caldera, who tried to do some changes and implement some changes. It wasn't very successful. Chavez came in and did a lot of changes. Gutierrez could have been in italics as well there, but you get great changes with Correa, Sanchez Lozada via Mesa, who tried to appease the opposition, but wasn't too successful. You get the same thing with De La Rua, Dualde, Kirchner. And I also put on the direction in terms of economic policies here. So I'm still trying to figure out how these two elements can be related, because of course the vast changes of neoliberalism, you see it's on a much broader scale, of course, than just these two countries. But the timing wise it's quite close. And I want to return also to what I see, because I've been working. I was going to hold a presentation for some students in Bergen on democracy, but it was due to the volcanic ashes this spring. It was cancelled, and then I thought I could try to link this with the topic of presidential and democratic instability. Because I would say when we put on the big map from Freedom House, you had someone in green and someone in yellow there. And of course that's because Freedom House definition of democracy is liberal democracy, and you have free and then you have partly free. So all the partly free countries, you basically find the populist oriented democracy. So I put up three models which, you know, aren't models that describe what is actually going on necessarily, but they describe just as well what might be the official rhetoric of aspirations for those regimes. So you have the ones that try to emulate, or rhetorically at least talk about, you can put in the group of liberal democracies. Well, these are all the good countries, but still Chile, Uruguay, Brazil, Costa Rica, Panama, trying their Dominican Republic, and I put some associated members which I'm not sure where to put. But El Salvador has made a transition now with a new left-wing government that's gone quite well, remarkably well, seems like, at least in terms of some measurements. Paraguay, Peru. I put in italics the countries where we've had presidential interruptions. You see in that group, Brazil has an impeachment, Dominican Republic, democratic transition, Peru has a democratic transition. You can discuss placements here, of course. Then you have what I would maybe call the security democracies. I'm not sure whether that is a good term. But countries, that group might be expanded or smaller, I don't know. But one at least recognition of these countries is that civil liberties, human rights are under pressure due to some sort of war on an internal enemy of some sort, or high levels of violence. You see it in Mexico today, of course. You've seen it in Colombia for decades, probably. You've seen it with some policy measurements has been taken in more Central American countries than Honduras and Guatemala, which I've put there, on the mano dura policies and so on and so forth. So I would just put that as security democracies. That countries that some, at least rhetorically, in terms of security, are big in the national debates, and you actually get policies that follow up on the security issues that might attack civil liberties and general human rights. Also coincides with now the war on terror. And then you have the popular sovereignty democracies, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, and associated members, Argentina and Nicaragua, maybe. And there you see 4 at least of those 5 countries have had interruptions, and they've all been the type of policy interruptions. So what you have in those countries, of course, is that the old types of institutions are under pressure. At least in Venezuela, Bolivia and Ecuador, you got these great constitutional replacements and the creation of new types of institutions and discrediting of the old institutions, old parties, old unions, you name it. And some freedoms, at least the freedoms, at least some freedoms in terms of liberties are also under pressure. So these are different also from the type of liberal democracies. And what is also interesting about these regimes is what I try to define as they are essentially contested. Because the old elites are fighting the new elites over both the idea of what democracy is. Should it be a popular sovereignty democracy where we discuss popular participation, mass mobilization, or should it be a liberal democracy where the idea is, well, USA or Western Europe or whatever, or the old type of democracy that they had. Of course, aspiring to become liberal democracy, aspiring to become liberal. But there are something going on in these countries that is more profound in terms of the regime, because what is being debated is essentially what democracy is and or should be at the conceptual level, but also as practice. So I in a paper I'm writing, I'm taking up the concept by Galli from the 50s. He said that democracy is essentially a contested concept. We can never agree on it. So I'm saying, okay, we'll put that on the board here. Of course, in these regimes, you can still come to some kind of agreement at one point, but if their stands are as they are now, it doesn't exist. So, interesting thing in terms of the interruptions we get. I said that the policy interruptions are the ones that are harder to defend democratically. Now, these interruptions precede several of the regimes that are popular sovereignty democracies, so essentially contested. And interesting, at least in Bolivia, and also you see it in Venezuela, the groups that tried to push the old elites out are now constitute now the new elites. It's not so clear in Ecuador. It's much more complicated picture there. But at least in 2 of these countries. And of course the Piquetero movement at one point at least in 2002 also was